Kiran, it is such a pleasure to have you here with me today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Kayla.
Of course. I already mentioned I'm super excited. I just joined as an advisor for your company, Timeless Biotech. And really, it's tackling one of the most important issues, in my opinion, as it relates to longevity for women, and that is ovarian longevity. So, today we're going to be talking all things ovarian longevity, why it's important, what your new tool is going to be offering, and so much more. So, let's just get started with, what really brought you or started your interest in ovarian health and like ovarian longevity?
Well, that is a little bit of a loaded question, but also a really good one. So I started getting very, very interested in in physiology and approaching physiology through a lens of biotechnology. So I'm a bioengineer by training from UC San Diego, and what I really started to find a lot of interest in is looking at the best way, the most elegant ways to intercept that cascade that we see
Mhm.
happen in the body. So all of these different pathways. And when you look at these distinctions between how we're currently addressing lots of diseases in the status quo, is we see a lot of pharmacological interventions. So those are mostly small molecules based. But I started to get more and more of a fascination towards the biotechnology approach, which focuses on large molecules and also focuses on really tapping into the existing mechanisms that are in our cells and kind of
Mhm.
hijacking them or harnessing them through things like gene therapies or like vaccines or even eventually in the future gene editing. So that interest led me more and more towards the longevity world, where you start to see lots of these interventions like biohacking that really find elegant solutions to get the body to behave in the way we want it to. And as I went more and more into the longevity space, I realized that the crux of longevity for women, and when women really start to see things start to deteriorate very rapidly for them, is that menopausal transition. So it's less about me finding ovarian longevity and more about it just finding me as that solution or that that one facet of women's health that is so closely tied to health span and so closely tied to longevity that I ended up realizing we needed targeted solutions to study it and see if we can interventionally actually address ovarian longevity and time to menopause.
I love that and obviously agree wholeheartedly that it's like the most important issue. So, when you were kind of getting into the idea that ovarian longevity was such a substantial marker, or the, let's say, decline or aging of your ovaries was such an important marker to longevity, what were you finding?
Yeah, so a big part of it was looking at different interventions that focused on longevity, but weren't necessarily carrying those same results for women. So
Mm.
I, for a very long time, was following a very research driven protocol for health. And lots of that research was based on men. So I found myself in a position where I didn't have a period for like 12 months. And it's not for the reason that most people would assume it is. It was genuinely because I was like, quote unquote, working out like a man, eating like a man, and not kind of ignoring the fact that I am not a man. And biohacking looks different for men and women. And ultimately, when I started to get deeper and deeper into these reproductive conditions like endometriosis, PCOS, and I started to learn more and more about hormones and the protective effects that estrogens and progesterones carry, the importance of oxytocin, melatonin, all of these different hormones, I realized that in order to preserve those protective effects that we get as women, that like reduce our likelihood of diseases that men are typically more prone to, in order to harness that, you need to make sure you're ovulating successfully. So
Yeah.
I kind of learned the hard way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just as a side note about this, because it's been on my mind and I wanted to mention it to the general audience, I mentioned in a recent YouTube video that you can have inovulatory cycles, right? So you can still be having menstruation, you can still be having your bleed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're ovulating. So I was just thinking back to that YouTube video. And so what I do, and I think can be like kind of an at home potential way is do some hormone measurements, like I use this little device called a Mira, and it'll give
Mhm.
you up to date. So it'll actually show you if your hormones are operating in a normal fashion and can help to confirm your ovulation. So that's a little tiny bit off topic, but it is still important because some women can be having what looks like a typical cycle, but if they're not ovulating, that's still an important piece because, that really does impact how our hormones work throughout the month, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I have my Mira too, for the exact same reason, to make sure that you're ovulating successfully. It's really good continuous data that you can get
Yeah.
daily to make sure, yeah, that things are going like everything's going properly, um, in ovulation. Because even if you are successfully ovulating, if you don't have proper development,
Mhm.
um, like follicular development that can also have hormone signals that you can pick up on. And then there are different things you can do to adjust for that. I know there's like cycle syncing is very controversial in some worlds, but I just know personally if I work out and do intense cardio on my period ends within the next 2 days. I don't
Yeah.
bleed for as long as I should. So I know from that signal that that's not the right approach for me. So you can really, like, start to take that data as feedback to see
Mhm.
if you are, like, disrupting your ovulation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like a very controversial area right now about should women be, let's say, yeah, cycle syncing. So from nutrition to workouts to even sleep, we know that there could be increased sleep demands. And then so there's one kind of, camp that says, "Absolutely not, it doesn't matter." And then there's this other camp from a lot of women that have actually self-reported positive results, right? That
Mhm.
are saying there is, some benefit to adhering your cycle. I'm, like, in the middle, right? So I definitely do make some adjustments, but I don't plan my adjustments. Make the adjustments if I feel I need it, right? So I don't have any PMS symptoms, I just never have, and, so I don't have to, like, ease up on workouts a ton in late luteal or during the bleed, but everybody is so bio-individual, and that's why it's so important to look at your own data and then compare it against your own outcomes, right? So for everybody that's wondering what to do if you're listening to this and you're a woman, I mean, I think one, there is a lot of validity in, slightly making adjustments, whether it be to sleep, exercise, nutrition. And I have a bunch of like videos and stuff on this, so I'm not going to go too deep. But if you don't feel like you need that, then also, you don't have to.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you find that your body is reacting and responding in a certain way, like I said, like you're not bleeding if you exercise at certain times, or you're not bleeding long enough, or you are like you're completely fine. Like you said, you don't have PMS symptoms, then you can basically respond based on that behavior. Everyone is so different. And I hear some of the strangest stories when I talk to people, especially when it comes to ovulation in their period. Like, one of my personal experiences was, like I mentioned, I didn't have a period for 12 months. I got into a relationship, clockwork.
Interesting.
So, yeah, everyone's different. Obviously, it's like oxytocin has a strong influence on, like, the pathways that lead to ovulation, so I'm assuming that was the link.
Yep.
But there's definitely a lot you have to listen to and respond to with your body.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously, stress plays a huge role, right? So, if you are someone that has a really high load of stress, you might be at like that tipping point where you need to dial it back. But if you manage stress really well, then maybe you don't. So, anyway, that was a bit of a deviation, but I think it was an important like conversation because it's just, obviously, I'm like have a very small little type of content that I'm fed through the algorithm, but I'm just seeing conflicting statements about this like every single day. So, glad we could just bring, some light to the issue. But what I'm more interested in getting into is ovarian longevity. And,
Mhm.
what I'm so excited about in this company, not only, of course, am I excited that women can, potentially understand when they might enter menopause, super important. But also really interested in understanding potentially why we think the ovaries age at such a rapid speed, right? So, would love for you to just talk about that. Do you have any I know we're still kind of waiting on the data, but, like, just in general, I mean, first principles thinking, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, of course. So there are a lot of different theories of why menopause happens and why ovaries age at a faster rate. Some of them include the grandmother theory, that evolutionarily, to have a grandmother or like who's able to help the mother raise a child, so someone who doesn't have their own kid, doesn't have any young kids, who can also assist with raising children was evolutionary beneficial. So that's like one theory of why menopause happens. Some other theories actually focus on preservation, that women beyond a certain age might not, it might not be evolutionarily beneficial for them to have more kids. It might not be considered safe physiologically because it's a very demanding process. So there are a lot of different theories as to why the ovaries end up aging so much faster than the rest of the body. But I think the conclusion that lots of different people are coming to is that we've never lived this long. We are living very, very long. So even though many people are have a natural aversion to some pharmacological intervention or some things that seem unnatural to them when it comes to the perimenopausal or menopausal transition. Unfortunately, we don't live the same lives as hunter-gatherers, and fortunately, we don't live as short as hunter-gatherers did. So that's why we have to really focus on actively making interventions when it comes to ovarian longevity. And that's where our tool starts to assess different drivers personalized to everyone's, because everyone's different, everyone's individual biology, and how you can actually work with focused target areas that are specifically driving that ovarian aging in you, which may be due to certain lifestyle factors that we have now, which we didn't have historically.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, yeah, let's get into some of those markers. What are you looking at Timeless Biotech to potentially give, a age in which you might enter menopause?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite topics. So with Timeless, and I know that you did give a bit of an introduction on this, but with Timeless, the reason that we decided to build this ovarian age clock and time to menopause predictor is because there's a very broad range that women can typically experience menopause in. Around 10 years where they can experience that final menstrual period, and like 25% of women don't even fall within that 10-year range, and that's not a racially diverse set of data that we're pulling from there. On top of that, perimenopause can start significantly earlier. So women can actually spend like a decade or more in perimenopause before they have that menopausal transition. So because of that, we wanted to bring clarity into this window and actually allow women to have some agency over their lifestyle practices that could potentially, and like potentially nutraceutical interventions that could delay that time to event. And what we found when running our analysis is that many of these biomarkers are like novel. We didn't know that these were predictive of time to menopause. For instance, one of the biomarkers we identified was UTI frequency. And at your first instinct to that, most people's are that if your estrogen levels are declining, your vaginal microbiome is being impacted, and therefore you must have more of a susceptibility to UTIs. However, what we found is that even for women over a decade before menopause onset, it was predictive for their time to menopause. So this is something that goes way back. When I started, like, gaining access to this data and engineering this tool, people were telling me when it comes to menopause and when it comes to ovaries and ovarian aging, you don't know what's happening. You have no signals of what's happening until it's broken. That's what
Mhm.
people would say. Now we're finding that well before estrogen and progesterone even drop, we see a drop in melatonin in women's 30s, which leads to a spike in FSH, which leads to disruption in ovulation, which leads to a decline in estrogen progesterone. So there are a lot of early signals that we can actually pick up on. So UTI frequency, um, stress associated with certain stimuli. So even if you consider yourself someone who can manage stress well, if you have a stressful environment, it still influences your time to menopause. Sleep is a top 10 feature. So, how much sleep you get is very, very predictive, more predictive than diet, in
Mm.
fact. So, definitely very critical. Another interesting one is, and these I'll say them as a pair, is whether you experience pleasure during sex. So whether you actually, and that can be extended to whether you actually climax during sex, and
Mhm.
whether you masturbate, the frequency of your masturbation. So these are also some predictive features we find, and there's associations with oxytocin levels, which can also help support ovulation, for predicting time to menopause and prolonging ovarian longevity.
I have so many questions about exogenous molecules and their role in this. Obviously, we could supplement with melatonin. We could also supplement with oxytocin, if that isn't something that you're getting enough of naturally. But just to stick on, biomarkers for potential ovarian aging. I know, are you guys looking at AMH or any other more kind of standard? And then can you talk about a little bit, obviously it's proprietary, but how this algorithm may be able to give you an indication of what your ovarian status is and when you might be entering menopause.
Yeah, of course. So we definitely test for AMH, FSH, estradiol. Now, typically, if someone tells you that they're going to give you, like, they're going to derive an analysis to do with menopause based on a one-time blood test, typically you should run, because there's very little you can tell from a one-time snapshot of hormone levels. However, when it comes to a sophisticated model like our machine learning model, it's doing a lot more than just reading these hormone levels and their actual values. In fact, the values AMH, FSH, and estradiol alone don't even crack the top 20 in predictive performance. It's the intrinsic relationships between these variables and other self-report variables in our model that actually can tell you something about your ovarian health and your rate of ovarian aging, in addition to flagging what levels you should be, like, potentially supplementing, what lifestyle practices might be backfiring for you. We can actually identify those individual target areas. So, as for how our model can inform your rate of ovarian aging, I think of it very similar, like it's very similar to a biological clock. So, the same way biological age gives you that added autonomy in a way that chronological age doesn't, that tells you that you have more control over your own health than just what time dictates. Ovarian age can do the same thing. So, we analyze these markers and we find with significant accuracy we can forecast a woman's time to menopause in, like, unprecedented accuracy, and also by extension determine the rate of your ovarian aging and what your current ovarian age is. And you can continue to retest those markers as you follow these protocols that are meant to help, you focus on those specific target areas with, like, high adherence practices, in addition to, like, retesting to also see if there are certain changes you may have made that could be backfiring on your ovarian aging.
Yeah. Well, also retesting, I'm assuming that you can make it better too, right? So you could also incorporate interventions that would potentially slow that ovarian aging or even like reverse some of the damage. Is reversing damage a possibility right now?
So that's our hope. We don't have, because we have never had a tool like this that could allow us to identify if interventional data or, like, interventional practices are actively delaying your time to menopause. We can't conclusively say that, but we have a lot of reason to believe that based on some of the research we've seen in preclinical data, based on some of the observational research we see, and based on some of the anecdotal protocols that lots of clinicians follow in, like, their concierge clinics, that you could potentially reverse ovarian aging. And in many cases, some people have even seen reversal of POI with certain practices and certain interventions. So we're hoping to get more data on that using the tool.
Yeah, that's so exciting. I would love to talk about some of these anecdotal protocols that are being implemented at like different clinics and what you guys are seeing.
Yeah, for sure. So lots of these clinics have taken things into their own hands because we've been very behind, in this category, as we are in many categories of women's health. Um, I think many of the protocols that are very effective do focus on hormones, and they focus on cycling you through certain hormones during early perimenopause or sometimes even before perimenopause. And there's controversy there. Is definitely something that has to be done with the guidance of a physician. But there are protocols that I have come across, which I have seen, which focus on actually making what they say making menopause optional through like something called the Wilkin protocol, which actually focuses on maintaining a bleed uh, and continuing to bleed well past when people typically experience menopause. So that's something that I've come across. We don't have much data on it and whether it's actively helping women or whether it's hurting women. So that's one category that I'm interested in looking more into the research of when we get more research in that category. Other things include more nutraceutical interventions. There's a lot of hype around the mitochondria's importance in ovarian health. I'm drinking that Kool-Aid a lot lately. If
I'm
definitely,
pouring the
uh,
Kool-Aid. I'm helping to pour the Kool-Aid.
I'm pouring the Kool-Aid. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm making the Kool-Aid and testing
All
the
the
Kool-Aid.
things, yeah.
All of the things possible. And I fully support this because lots of the hormones that we talk about, like estrogen, progesterone, even testosterones, like androgens, they have a precursor hormone called pregnenolone. And many physicians are starting to actually test for pregnenolone levels, especially in younger women, and that could have predictive importance for menopause as well and premature ovarian insufficiency. And that hormone, pregnenolone, is there's a reaction that converts cholesterol into pregnenolone. So in case this is new information for some people, um, all of these steroid hormones have a lipid raft, meaning the backbone comes from cholesterol. So if you don't have enough healthy fats, you don't have the ingredients you need to produce these steroid hormones. So the pathway goes cholesterol into pregnenolone into these steroid hormones. And that conversion of cholesterol to pregnenolone, which is very critical, happens in the mitochondria. So it's very important for hormone balance and hormone levels, endogenous hormone production, to have functioning, like good, highly functioning mitochondria. So what
Mhm.
they found in early research is that in women with PCOS, let's start with PCOS. In women with PCOS, they actually had more mitochondrial dysfunction than women who did not have PCOS in the ovaries,
Mm.
which has a very high concentration of mitochondria. And they also found that women with endometriosis had like differences in their mitochondria in comparison to women who did not have endometriosis in their ovaries. So I'm definitely becoming a bigger believer in some of the early research for things like bioavailable CoQ10, or if you're familiar with timelines, MitoPure for mitophagy. So those are definitely some nutraceutical interventions that could potentially help with ovarian health.
Yeah. Well, so you could do, high intensity interval training is great for mitophagy and um, biogenesis in the mitochondria. But again, it's like it has to be taken at the right time and the right dose at the right period for women. So that's like an intervention that I think is interesting. And I think red light is interesting on the ovaries directly. So it's something that I've been just testing. Actually, we should do some sort of like pilot study with me and some of these interventions that I do. Like, I have a hyperbaric oxygen chamber behind me, so I know that they are doing studies currently on, AMH levels and hyperbaric and a variety of different women's health conditions and hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So could be interesting to see how, 40 sessions, could shift the ovarian health in one way or the other.
Yeah, and that's one of the main reasons we developed this tool. Like otherwise, how do you know? You can't really
Mm.
eyeball your ovarian health. You really
Yeah.
can't. You can't even eyeball like hormone levels really, like
Yeah.
successfully. It's very complicated. So identifying which interventions are working is the way to appropriately improve your health. You have to test, do, retest, do,
Yeah.
retest, do. That's the way to approach things.
Totally. Even as it relates to, pharmaceutical interventions. again, I think it's not a one size fits all, especially for men and women. So I'm taking, I'm like maybe I'll end up doing it twice a year, but at least once a year, I'm going to do rapamycin because there was this study, right, potentially showing it could delay ovarian aging by 5 years. But when I did that, it was about like the same time that I announced it was right before Brian Johnson announced that he stopped doing rapamycin because it was aging him, right? And I'm not sure on the validity of that in general, but my response was, I'm not doing it for just the biological age in general. I'm doing it for the ovarian aging. So I find it will be so fascinating to see like differences in even these pharmaceuticals that could be potentially beneficial. But the reasoning might be different for men and women.
Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of things that women have been discouraged from because they backfired on men, and melatonin is one of them. But when it comes to rapamycin, I'm very excited to see the rest of the study results come out for the Vibrant study. I believe they're coming out in late 2026. But I think lots of people in this field looking at ovarian longevity have their eye on it. My take on rapamycin is what it is telling us, and obviously we're going to wait for the remaining results of the study as well, but because these immunosuppressive effects could potentially have benefits for ovarian longevity, like what does that tell us about that pathway? What information can we extract from that? Like, is this something that's like battling autoimmune behavior? Is this something that's just battling inflammation as a whole? And how can we take things a step further and look more at immunomodulatory molecules, which might be a little more like more of an elegant solution? I think that's really the ethos that is like really important to move forward with, is how we can take something that's giving us these results that we like and make it more compatible with these pathways. Like an immunosuppressive will suppress your immunity. That's definitionally what it does. But an immunomodulator will give your body what it needs. If it needs suppression or if it needs stimulation, it'll do what's needed. So I'm becoming a bigger and bigger fan of like some smarter molecules that like rapamycin might send us in the direction of, that have immunomodulatory benefits for ovarian longevity.
Can you give us some examples? What would you say are these immunomodulators?
So there's definitely a whole realm of molecules that are considered immunomodulators. Some of the early research that I have seen, and like I said, I've been drinking the mitochondria Kool-Aid like there's no tomorrow, um, is with like molecules that focus on mitochondrial health and how that can influence your systemic inflammation and reduce inflammation in the body. So, like I already mentioned, like Mitopure as one of them, by Timeline. There's definitely, that is an immunomodulator, and we have seen reduction in C-reactive protein in their trials in humans. So that's clinical research, which gives us reason to believe that there could potentially be um, room for improvements in ovarian health. So this is now speculation, but definitely, like I said, like it's that immunomodulation. So we're pulling from what we learned in that rapamycin study: high concentration of mitochondria in the ovaries, importance of hormone synthesis in the mitochondria. So that those are three pretty strong pillars to pull from.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's talk about hormone health. So you say that hormone health has a huge impact on ovarian longevity, right? So, what are some of the ways to potentially have better hormone balance, ways to look into it? What are your thoughts?
So I definitely think that it starts with the hypothalamus pituitary axis. I think a lot of people are coming to that conclusion, that many of us feel this imbalance and disruption in hormone levels because of an overactive nervous system, and that can deplete things like that. That very obviously depletes your progesterone. It spikes cortisol, which results in depletion in other hormones. Like it can result in lower estrogen, and you can even start experiencing symptoms of estrogen deficiency, especially if you're having those anovulatory cycles or not menstruating at all. So it really starts there. And there are different ways you can approach things. Like I've become a very big believer in adaptogens because I'm starting to see more and more clinically validated adaptogenic ingredients. So, if you are interested in like calming the nervous system, ashwagandha is definitely a good ingredient. I specifically take KSM 66 ashwagandha after I saw research demonstrating that it was seen to reduce FSH levels and increase estradiol levels. And that FSH E2 ratio also has very high predictive performance in our model. So I was sold once I saw that data, um, which directly shows like hormone balance and potentially ovarian longevity with KSM 66 ashwagandha. So I take that. There's also adaptogenic coffees that I've recommended all of the coffee drinkers I know to switch to prevent some of the like impacts of the cortisol spike they typically get from coffee, which can be countered and like your mind can be relaxed through adaptogens like ashwagandha. So that's definitely a pathway I've looked into. Then there's vagus nerve stimulation. So I do consider myself a yogi, and I'm trying to step more into the what they call the energetic practice as opposed to just the physical practice. So the physical practice is obviously very, very calming and it can do a lot. It has a lot of benefits for your body, but then there are also forms of breath work that can sometimes force your mind into a meditative state. And I've found those can be much more effective than just a typical like attempt at meditation. So there's ways you can like flutter your breath, not to a point of hyperventilation, because that's not good for
Yeah.
you. Um,
Yeah.
but like just, yeah, just in and out. There's ujjayi breathing, which is when you really try to focus on making a noise with your throat when you breathe in and out. Um,
Mhm.
there's certain there are certain binds you can do as well, which
Mhm.
can really calm your mind. So I've explored more of that area as well for calming the hypothalamus pituitary axis and promoting hormone balance.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think stress obviously is one of the most major factors, and it can be mental stress, physical stress, a combination of the both, lack of sleep. There's so many different contributions, and it's such a delicate balance with hormones. But yeah, I think stress reduction is a huge one. Um, can you explain a little bit what is going on with our hormones throughout? Like, we're saying that if FSH is increasing substantially, that could be predictive that you're moving closer to menopause, right? Or perimenopause. But can you explain kind of some of these terms and what's going on, what they mean in your body?
Yeah, for sure. So the first drop we see, and I mentioned a little bit of this, is typically in a woman's 30s, early 30s, and that's the drop in melatonin.
Hmm.
Um, Once that happens, it's obviously starts to carry a bunch of symptoms. So you do start to see changes in your ability to sleep. Women are like they find they're able to sleep for shorter periods of time, even if they do fall asleep. There's also um, irregular ovulation that starts to occur because once you have a drop in melatonin, that's when your that melatonin is really sending your body a signal, and FSH is really in control of lots of the ovulation that occurs. So once your FSH starts to increase, that's when ovulation starts to get disrupted. And if you're not ovulating correctly, we know then your ovarian hormones like estrogen and progesterone start to reduce like in concentration, and they carry a lot of protective effects on our body. And then you kind of enter more of a positive feedback loop where these things start to feed into each other and you start to get more symptomatic, which leads to a change in lifestyle practices often, which then feeds back into the hormone disruption. So you really want to break that positive feedback loop or prevent it from starting as early as you can so you can prolong the period of time you have endogenous hormone production for.
Yeah. As it relates to FSH though, is it what's going on? I don't actually know how this works super in detail. So is FSH increasing because your brain has to work harder to signal to the ovaries to release an egg, or why does FSH increase?
Yes, so FSH is responsible for the follicular, so the development of the follicle, so the growth of the eggs that are in our ovaries, and it's basically it is involved in regulation of the hormone levels. So If your FSH is high, it's indicating that you have to work harder to call from your ovarian reserve. So the reason FSH is considered an ovarian reserve indicator along with hormones like AMH is because you need to you need to release the egg. And if you have a lower ovarian reserve, then it's harder to release that egg. So
Mm.
even when you have high ovarian reserve, you can get high FSH, and that's more of a mental or it can be more of a hormone imbalance issue. But the fundamental purpose of FSH is to trigger that release, which can spike when it gets more and more difficult for that to happen.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. That's what I was thinking, but just wanted to make sure um, I was on the same page. What age would you recommend? Let's just say, also if you're a clinic owner and you are interested in offering technology like this AI, I know that that's something that Timeless is working on rolling out. If I still, was heading up and owning my clinic, I would totally offer it there. Obviously, I have exited and now I have more time to do fun things like this. But yeah, if you're a clinic owner and you want to offer the service, we'll drop Kiran's details in the show notes. But let's say, this becomes mainstream, which is what the plan is. What ages would you recommend testing? Let's just say, you could test whenever you wanted. Would you look at in your 20s, in your 30s, in your 40s? Do one every decade? Do one every year? What would that look like?
Well, I'm definitely gonna do it. And I'm in my 20s, so I'm definitely gonna start now, but I would recommend 30s if you have to. If you have to start in your 30s, I would say it's a good time to begin because what we found even when women didn't know if they were in perimenopause or not is that 55% of women between the ages of 30 to 35 experienced moderate to severe perimenopausal symptoms. So, like I said, this is a positive feedback loop. This is accumulation of things that start to happen, that start to make the momentum go in a direction we don't want it to go. So, the
Right.
earlier you can catch things, the earlier you can interfere, the earlier you can disrupt that loop and send it hopefully in the opposite direction, or at least slow it down, the better. That way, you can actually start to practice a lot of the things that women are recommended, like strength training. And it can be really difficult to do when you're only getting 2 hours of sleep and you're stressed out of your mind. Like it can be difficult to implement some of these practices. But if you catch it early, you start testing in your 30s, then we can really give you some focus areas and you can make those modifications and keep retesting so that you can maintain that status of optimal health that many women have until the transition.
Right. And what are some of these symptoms of perimenopause?
Yeah, so there are a ton. There are lots. I think many people are coming to the conclusion that once you study estrogen in more detail, we're surprised you don't get more symptoms when
Mm.
you start to have decline. But many of them are weight gain or at least a shift in body composition. So you start
Mm.
to feel more accumulation of abdominal fat because estrogen is very important for body composition. You might start to feel muscle loss. You might start to have difficulty sleeping. We all know about hot flashes and night sweats. Unfortunately, even though those are the most well-known symptoms, those aren't the earliest symptoms. The earlier symptoms we tend to see are issues with sleep. Some people get bleeding gums. We see irregular periods is a very big indicator when some people are clockwork and then suddenly like things are all over the place. Some people have ringing in their ears. Some people have frozen shoulder. That's a later symptom, but they do experience it. Brain fog, like serious brain fog, people can experience. These are some of the more common things. And while I'm saying these, many people might be thinking, I wouldn't go into the doctor for that,
Yeah.
which is why you need to really be proactive when it comes to this transition, because it can be difficult to respond to symptoms that don't seem to have anything to do with your ovulation sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, that's why I'm just such a big advocate of labs, right? Like as often as you can, as in depth as you can, because you will catch things early, across the board, whether it be prediabetes, whether it be, your hormones are moving in the wrong direction. You can clearly see that, which I love. And now adding on tools such as this AI is just going to be so incredible. So very excited about that. Is there a link between when your mom went into menopause and when, you might go into menopause or your longevity? I've been seeing some articles circulating on that a lot.
Yeah, so that used to be one of the biggest tools that we used. And we made sure to test that marker as well when we were running our model, but it didn't end up making the top 50 for predictions in our scenario. But it was historically and is considered a very strong predictor. Sister's age of menopause, mother's age of menopause. These things do point to your personal ovarian longevity. But the good news is we find in our results that we have way more autonomy than we thought. Like, I went from not looking at hormones at all because of how difficult it is to derive value from female hormone levels due to the cycle fluctuation, the individual to individual fluctuation, to looking at the weights of our model and the predictive importance of our model and saying, wow, these hormones are telling us so much. We just weren't able to interpret them because we were looking at them too linearly or in too simplistic a way. So we do have a lot of control over things, even though genetics are obviously important, but not as important as we thought they were.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love that. That's great. Um, what is some of like how is the model being trained? Like when obviously again just high level, but what because there's such a deficit in research, how can the model be trained accurately?
Yeah, so we have like 40,000 data points that we trained our model on, including final menstrual period dates down to the day. So definitely a very, very robust model collected from all across the United States. So you don't have overfitting to, don't want to get too into the weeds, but so that you don't have overfitting to one specific geographical location. So it was very important to us that this model was robust and accurate because people typically have been sent in incorrect directions based on their blood work, and we wanted to fix that using machine learning, which we were able to do. We see unprecedented levels of accuracy. Our model is very, very sophisticated. Like, it runs 100,000 conditional branches for each person. And there are 1 billion mathematical operations that go into building the model. So this is not something that we should have been eyeballing at all. These hormones are something we should have been analyzing and interpreting in relationship to one another and relationship to other things about our biological profiles. And now that we have done that, we are able to make accurate predictions that we never thought were possible, especially with a one-time blood test.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm so excited. Obviously, I'm super thrilled to be involved. And I know that we're going to be launching this first B2B. And then eventually, though, it'll be something B2C where the consumer could just take their labs they get at their doctor's office, right? Upload them and then get this analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. So many people are already testing for these hormone panels. Many times they keep testing over the course of multiple months to actually get an idea of hormone, like the trajectory of these hormones. In this way, they can actually just plug in the hormones they're already testing. So AMH, FSH, estradiol, with more options if they want a more comprehensive profile, but really just
Mhm.
requiring these three and get that predicted time to menopause, ovarian age information, along with a personalized ovarian signature of what is driving your ovarian aging, powered by machine learning,
Hmm.
with target areas, with clinically validated protocols of how you can address those specific targets. So it's not just about testing, it's not just about doing things and praying that they're working, it's both. So you
Okay.
can both so you can make a conscious change to your behavior and to your lifestyle and see it work. That's how you keep adherence high. That's how you actually stick to protocols. So that's the approach we plan to use. And we also want to be able to validate some of the existing protocols that physicians have been using for years.
Mhm.
They've been promoting specific things. I know physicians who said, I swear I've reversed POI in hundreds of women, but I don't have any way to prove that. I just have these like mild changes in hormone levels and changes in lifestyle experiences. We can run our tool on that to give them that validation that they need. So it's
Yeah,
very, very exciting.
I love that. Well, where can people find out more information?
Well, if you are looking to order the test for yourself, then we do have a wait list. So timelessbiotech.com, you can find out more information and look into that. If you're looking to integrate our tool into your practice or validate your nutraceutical supplement or validate your existing protocols to show that they're actively delaying time to menopause, then you can also go through our wait list or contact us directly, um, like via email. There's also potential to integrate into digital health. So if you're interested there, you can contact us. We're open to lots of different partnerships. We really want to ensure that people are talking about ovarian longevity and focusing on female health span empirically. That's what we're all
Yeah,
about.
yeah. Well, I love that, and it's been such a pleasure to have you on with me today.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure speaking to you too, Kayla.
All right, well, we'll drop everything in the show notes, and I will talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks so much.
Of course.